I'm Malcolm Jolly for Good Food Revolution with Sebastiano Capponi from Villa Calcinaia. I hope I said that right.
You did it.
In a busy, noisy Mercato restaurant in downtown Toronto, where we've been having lunch and talking about Chianti Classico and the wines, some of the wines from Villa Calcinaia. Sebastiano, you're the vice president of the consortium of Chianti Classico. In that capacity, what's the difference between Chianti Classico and Chianti?
Well, Chianti Classico and Chianti are both wines. The main difference is that they're made in different places. The land of Chianti makes only one wine called Chianti Classico, and the Chianti wine is a conundrum. It's not made in the land of Chianti. It's made around it. So what actually Bill Neston, who wrote a wonderful book that I would advise people to buy to know more about the history of Chianti and Chianti Classico. He defines the wine from outside the region, the external Chianti. So, and also there are differences in the appellation system, in the use of Chianti still allows use of white grapes. The yielding are higher per hectare, and the total production is actually of Chianti wine is like three and a half more than Chianti Classico.
So generally speaking, if you see a wine that says Chianti Classico, there is some guarantee or indication that this is going to be a superior quality wine made within specific rules.
Well, in the fine wines market, people want a place, and Chianti Classico has a place, which is the land of Chianti, of course. And in this place, there are several villages that people go and visit. The problem with the Chianti wine is there's no really a place. It's more like a type of wine, more like a commercial wine and a type of wine, a style of wine. So that I think is the main issue the main difference between the two appellations. I mean, when you talk about Chianti Classico, you talk about land, you talk about a territory, and you invite people to come and visit and to see what it's like over there. And when you talk about Chianti, you're just selling a bottle of wine.
And what about you and your family? I mean, how do you approach making wine?
Well, we've been making wine. Well, the estate was purchased by my family in 1524, but wine was part of the production, because back then you produced agriculture was not just specialized like it is today. In each state you will produce everything that was needed for the sustenance of the people. So wine was part of it, was part of the diet. But also you have olive oil, you will have bread, you will have vegetables, you will have meat, of course. Not very often, because meat was a very rare thing even in those days. And so because animals were used to cultivate the land, so you could not kill your tool. And so wine was always been made. There were people in the generation, there were people more interested in making wine, and people who actually delegate everything to an agent. There's an interesting story about my brother coming back from the Biblioteca Riccardiana. I have to say that my brother Niccolò Capponi is an historian, and military historian to be precise, and he's also an expert on archives. And he found this document written in 1613 by my ancestor Niccolò Capponi on how to make wine in the French style. And he wrote a recipe on how to make wine back in 1613, and we actually replicated this recipe in 2011, and we made a wine out of it for a special edition of it. So wine throughout the century has always been made. The specialization on winemaking started in the late 50s, when the sharecropping system was coming to an end, and the type of cultivation changed from making wine to support the people who lived on the land, from making products, making products to sell on the market and pay your employees. And so that, of course, forced people to specialize, and they went through many experimentation, they tried different things. But what they focused on eventually was olive groves and vineyards, just because vineyards and olive groves work well together because they have different times for the picking, and they have different times for the pruning, so they don't overlap. The two cultivations do not overlap. So my family started planting in earnest about 30 hectares of vineyards between the 50s and 60s and 70s, and they started bottling with this very label in the late 50s. This label was actually created by my mother in 1962. Yeah, it's a family coat of arms that she interpreted for the Villa Calcinaia and Chianti Classico.
It's still very modern, I think, in a way.
I think so too. Yeah, I think she did a very good job.
Speaking of which, okay, but let's talk about the wines that we tasted today, which kind of take us through the Chianti Classico. The first is just Chianti Classico. This is there's a word for these entry-level wines.
Annata, yes.
Annata, which is to say the year that they were made.
Yes.
And the idea is that these are fresher wines to be drunk.
Well, yes,
faster, or?
Yeah. You know, Chianti Classico has changed the bylaws in '96 and allowed the usage only of red grapes to make wine, because we went from a wine that, like in the 50s and 60s, that was to be consumed very quickly, to start making wine that will also be good, yes, after a year and a half when they will be put on the market, but also be good also for cellaring purposes. Right. So a little different, little winemaking has changed a little differently. Of course, the Chianti Classico Annata will be the more readier to drink in the idea of the winemaker. There are three different echelon in Chianti Classico. There's a Chianti Classico Annata, there's a Chianti Classico Reserva, and there's a Chianti Classico Gran Selezione. These three different echelon, of course, are meant to be probably paired with different dishes, and also be the potential of cellaring probably for the last two are probably higher than on the Annata, but I've tasted some Annata of 15-20 years which were still delicious. So I would say you try. The main challenge for the winemaker today is to make a wine that it's good now, but it will be good also in 10 years, it will be good also in 20 years. That's the main challenge. The Villa Calcinaia Chianti Classico Annata, it's a blend of Sangiovese with a 10% Canaiolo. And I didn't say that the Villa Calcinaia lineup, it's only old vines. So these are all the vines that have been restored by me, that were planted by my grandfather and my father between 59 and 75. So these two wines are actually made at the same time, in the sense that all the vineyards are vinified and aged separately. Then it comes a time, usually after 15 months, where I do a tasting. I have all the different blocks on the table, all blind. Everything is blind tasting, and I decide what blocks are going to go for the Annata and what blocks are going to go for the Reserva. And the one I assign to Annata I blend in the big cement vats, and the one I assign to Reserva I blend in oak cask. Because I always prefer to keep all my vineyards separate, so I have more colors in my palette when I'm painting.
But to be clear, say that the Reserva is not an oaky wine at all. I mean, it's very well integrated.
No, we don't. Oak is a tool to make wine. It's not a goal. So, of course, whenever we have oak cask, so whenever I buy a new oak cask, I use always a wine that will go into a blend to put the first wine I put in the cask. It was always a wine that will go in a blend, because in that way all the new wood will be imparted to a wine that will go in a bigger blend.
Right.
So that way I managed to kind of subdue the wood impact on the new wood, and I use my barrels. Well, the cask I use for a very long time. I have a cask for dating back to 1990. So those are basically mostly, for the most part, neutral. And for the smaller barrels, I always keep the smaller barrels for at least 3-4 wines. So the impact of wood is much less.
And then can we talk about
the last wine?
Selezione?
Gran Selezione is an echelon that was created by the Consorzio Chianti Classico in 2014, and the main feature of this wine is that the wine can be made only with your proprietor's grapes or the proprietor's wine, meaning that you cannot buy grapes or buy wine to make this wine. And in my case, everything I make is my own, so I decided to be a little more specific, and I linked the Gran Selezione, my Gran Selezione, to specific sites. So I chose 3 vineyards, and those 3 vineyards differ from one another because of the climat, which is a beautiful French word which comprises 5 elements, which are soil, topsoil, subsoil, climate, inclination of the vineyard, and exposure of the vineyard. So there are 5 different climats that differ from one another dramatically, and I chose to vinify them and bottle on their own. So my Gran Selezione are all 100% Sangiovese, all single vineyards.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
I think that was a great lesson, but the best way to learn is to actually taste these lovely wines. So I think you're doing what you did. That's it.
Thank you very much.
My daddy was a rock and roll